psychiatrist and a theologian, but nonetheless, that's what she is, and she held a professorship about that. And so, you know, we can't think that any of the religions have the final answer at this point. So regardless of what your religion is, the question is, where is the Spirit taking us? And so one of the critical aspects of this is that everyone needs something creative to do. You need to be creating something, because that is how the human species is moving forward. If you don't create something, I'm creating these videos, and now there's about 780 videos that I've created on YouTube in the last 2.5 years. But as you've seen this evening, I've also been a painter, I've also been a novelist, I've also been a writer, and so I've been creating things throughout my life. And so if you're a young person, you need to think about what it is you're creating. What's your contribution to what, you know, what's your mosaic tile in the great story of humanity, because we're not where we ultimately are going to end up as a species. You know, as we know, if you all you have to do is turn on any of the television programs about the universe, and you pretty quickly figure out that life on this planet isn't going to be here forever. It's going to, you know, it might conceivably be here another 2 or 3 billion years, maybe 4. But ultimately, the sun, which is halfway through its life, is going to burn out. And when it does, there's not going to be any life on Earth. And so our species is either going to have to figure out how to get somewhere else, and where that somewhere else is, or we're just going to be a comma in the great history of the cosmos. And so those are some pretty profound questions to be asking ourselves going forward. Now, there are no questions, no comments. You agree with me entirely. Okay, maybe so. That would be great if everybody agrees with me. Okay, so I'm going to move over, and you're certainly welcome to bring up any other quotes that you might be interested in. But just going back to this question that, let's see, the question was about Christ going into hell. And okay, so that was definitely not Chris. So definitely not Chris. You know, what Dr. Jung emphasized throughout his life is that things happen in our psyche, and these are psychic facts. These are actual things. They're not, it's not nothing. And, you know, you can't have a conversation with, you know, your spouse without having words for that. And those words present themselves. I mean, I don't remember what I was talking about 2 minutes ago, and I really have no idea what I'll be talking about 2 minutes from now. But, you know, there's something that does know and is able to present those things on this live stream. And so those are psychic facts that are presenting themselves to you and to me and to everybody that ever watches this video in the future. And So what Dr. Jung was doing was, through imagination, which is a psychic fact, he was experiencing what it would be like to be Christ and to be crucified, dead and buried, and then go into hell for 3 days. And he imagined what that would be like. And so in that sense, in that experience, he experienced it. And so, I know when I wrote a novel that was done in a very similar fashion. It was done in an active imagination fashion. It wasn't something I just thunk up. It's something that came from my unconscious. And I certainly experienced everything that happened in that novel. And I even say that it's the autobiography of my anima from 1962 to 1993. And that novel came from somewhere. It didn't come from me. And so that's a psychic fact. So it came from somewhere, namely the self, and namely based on experiences that I had had in Japan over an eight-year period on 2 separate occasions. And it didn't come from my ego. I couldn't have sat down and, cruxed it out and figured out what I would say about any of that. But in terms of that experience and how intense that experience was, it was extremely intense. And that novel is on our Dropbox. So, if you go into, let's see what the folder is called, but I think it's pretty clear. It's called Group Leaders Writings. It's the 5th subfolder down. And then it's the very first subfolder under that, which is adult material. So if you're under 18, don't read it. It's not for you. But if you're over 18 and you want to find what I experienced, this is my story. And so just like Dr. Jung says in the Red Book, that was his experience, and you have your own. I say the same thing. My novel is my experience, but you can see how intense it was and how it came from another place. And I'm sure that you will see the archetypal imagery in there, but it is intense. My novel is intense, so do not read it if you think you will be triggered by it. And it does include erotica. And so I urge you to take a look if you have the guts for it, and feel free to talk to me about it, because I've fairly well, let's say, I've individuated through that part of my life fairly thoroughly, and I have self-reflected on it very heavily, and so I know where it came from. I know what it is, and those are all facts. Okay, so, and it was very intense for me at the time, and it included psychic images like Dr. Jung experienced in the Red Book. And, frankly, it scared the tar out of me when it first came out of me in 1993. And I put it in my drawer for 21 years because I just didn't know what I was going to do with it in my lifetime. And then as I got more and more into Dr. Jung's work, I started to see a place for it and how it had come and why it had come. And then when the Red Book was finally published in 2009, so that was 16 years later that we got the Red Book itself. And then I said, aha, the same thing happened to me that happened to Dr. Jung. And so that was a completely different kettle of fish for me. And so anyway, I hope you find that interesting. Is there anyone still hearing and seeing me? Because I'm still getting a notice on my screen saying that I'm live, but the screen health is not good. So are people still hearing me? Please say so if you can see and hear me here. Anyway, I will be keeping the video of this so that even if somehow it isn't going across well, we'll be able to reconstruct it later. Is there anyone there? Hello? Okay. All right. So in this book, which is C.G. Jung, Psychological Reflections, as you see, again, I've put my tabs on the book. So Miles is conscious, at least. Hi, Miles. So you are hearing me, correct? I gather you are. So I'm going to read a few of these quotes, and I'm going to read the ones that are I'm going to read the red tabs this week, which I think are the important ones, or I'm going to start to read the red ones. And then we'll go back to the blue ones and the green ones. And because the blue ones I also think are important. Those are about everyday life. The green ones are about instinct, and the yellow ones are about spirit, but I'm going to go with the red ones because I think they're really hot. And so, let's see. Okay, so there's a quote here: "Our blight is ideologies. They are the long-expected Antichrist." Now, Dr. Jung was always anathema about isms, all kinds of isms. Any ism that you wish to choose, Dr. Jung was against it, because what he believed was that if we don't act as individuals, then we're going to just get swept up in the tide of some movement, and movements always go bad. And we have seen this on both sides of the spectrum throughout history. And it's only when an individual gets an idea and makes something happen that things change. So that quote is from Collected Works 18, and it's from an essay called On the Re-Education of the Germans, paragraph 778. And so the quote was, again, "Our blight is ideologies. They are the long-expected Antichrist." And so he was indifferent to whether you were on the right or the left. He felt that they were all bad. And what he used to say is that if you put 100 admirable persons in a room, you get one giant blockhead. And the reason is that everybody just goes along and doesn't speak up. Fortunately, we have we have Miles here speaking up, and so he's at least conscious, and a few others have spoken up through the evening. But most people are just going along going, and that's why isms are not good. So there's another quote here. What is the use of technological improvements when mankind must still tremble before those infantile tyrants, ridiculous yet terrible in the style of Hitler? Figures like these owe their power only to the frightening immaturity of the man of today and to his barbarous unconsciousness. Truly, we can no longer afford to underestimate the importance of the psychic factor in world affairs. And that, too, is from Collected Works 18. I'm sorry. Let me double check what that is from, because that's an important one. Okay. It's from the foreword to a book by Cornelia Brunner that Dr. Jung wrote, and it's now included in the Collected Works at volume 18, paragraph 11, apparently. Anyway, that's what it says, Collected Works. That may not be the paragraph, but that is what it is. Okay. Other questions? I'm glad that I'm able to give you something to do while you're doing the dishes, Miles. That's very useful. I often need something like that. That's I'm often listening to a Audible book or something like that. Okay, so the next quote, and this is from the individual and the community, is, if man cannot exist without society, neither can he exist without oxygen, water, albumin, fat, and so forth. Like these, society is one of the necessary conditions of his existence. It would be ludicrous to maintain that man lives in order to breathe air. It is equally ludicrous to say that the individual exists for society. Society is nothing more than a term, a concept for the symbiosis of a group of human beings. A concept is not a carrier of life. The sole and natural carrier of life is the individual, and that is so throughout nature. And the quote on that is from Psychotherapy Today, Collected Works 16, The Practice of Psychotherapy, and it is paragraph 224. Now, what I would say here is that what Dr. Jung emphasized over and over again is that it's the individual, it's you and me, that carry life. Society isn't alive, okay? When the church closes its doors and turns off the lights after services, it's not alive. It's only alive when human beings go into it and make it alive. And so it's up to us to figure out what the future will be and to bring that through to fruition. And so you can't escape it. Nobody's going to do it for you. And, you know, I'm 72 years old, so I'm not going to help you much. And so like our friend Jordan Peterson. He's not our friend, but he's a worthwhile model to emulate. You know, we can bring you to the water, but we can't make you drink. And it's going to be up to you to decide the way your society will be in the future. So, here's a quote. We yield too much to the ridiculous fear that we are at bottom quite impossible beings, that if everyone were to appear as he really is, a frightful social catastrophe would ensue. Many people today take man as he really is to mean merely the eternal discontented, anarchic, rapacious element of human beings, quite forgetting that these same human beings have also erected those firmly established forms of civilization which possess greater strength and stability than all the anarchic undercurrents. The strengthening of this social personality is one of the essential conditions for man's existence. Were it not so, humanity would cease to be. The selfishness and rebelliousness we meet in the neurotic's psychology are not man as he really is, but an infantile distortion. In reality, the normal man is civic-minded and moral. He created his laws and observes them, not because they are imposed on him from without, that is a childish delusion, but because he loves law and order more than he loves disorder and lawlessness. And that's from the Theory of Psychoanalysis, Collected Works 4, and paragraph 442. Now, what we're saying here is basically what I said earlier, that human beings have decided for the good side most of the time, and the civilizations that we see around us, the fact that we have walls and a roof over our head, is exactly because humanity has gone forward in a reasonable way. I mean, it's not perfect, far from it. But anyway, Miles says, I went to a town hall with a globe and 2 layers of food film to make a point about the atmosphere. It would not take my question. Trying to change the world is not easy. Yeah, and so it's not a question of just sticking your head up over the parapet a little bit and then ducking back down either. You have to find ways to get people's attention, and that I can vouch for the fact is not easy, and it can cause trouble in your life. So you have to reflect on that too. Reflection is an important part of this, because not every cockamamie idea needs to be brought into society. Only the ideas that have merit. And so I'm not saying that your idea didn't have merit, but you know, we have to have, if we believe in our ideas, then we have to have the force to bring them to people's attention, whatever that may be. Now, all right, so what is food film? I mean, your comment is intriguing. I went to a town hall with a globe and 2 layers of food film to make a point about the atmosphere. So what is food film? I guess I'm not familiar with that term. Obviously we have a problem with our atmosphere. If you imagine something that's 20 miles away from you, it's quite close. For most of us, if we're not trapped by a city, we can get to something that's 20 miles away in 20 minutes. And the problem is that above us here, we have 20 miles of atmosphere, and that is it. If that atmosphere were to go away, all of us would be toast. Or we wouldn't be toast, maybe. We would be not here, though. So Dr. Jung says, I do not regard the pursuit of science as a bickering about who is right, but as an endeavor to augment and deepen human knowledge. And that seems a pretty important concept. We're all trying to deepen human knowledge, both our own and that of others. And it's not a food fight. And so that is from Symbols of Transformation, Collected Works, Collected Works 5, and it's paragraph 685. And so the point, quite simply, is that Dr. Jung wasn't going to get into vigorous debate with his competitors. He simply decided they'll catch up in due time. He thought it might take 600 years. I see. Miles is saying that the food film is saran wrap. I see. And so it's the scale of the Earth, it's how thick our finite atmosphere is. That makes a lot of sense. And my city is asking the citizens to spend billions on Winter Olympics in 2026. Not a priority for me anymore. Well, Olympic Games can be quite good for a community because they bring in a lot of jobs and lots of other things happen that are good because of them. It does put a boot in the posterior of politicians to get them to get something to happen. And sometimes we do see great improvements. I mean, the one that I especially remember is the Summer Olympics of 1964, which was in Japan. And I unfortunately didn't get to see it. My parents and my brother and sister got to. I had left Japan by the time it came. But the very first memory I have after arriving at our hotel in Japan, the first day, January 23rd, 1962, at the Yokosuka Kanko Hotel, was a poster of sprinters taking off in an Olympic race, and it said Tokyo 1964 with the Olympic rings on it. And I hadn't heard or maybe I had heard, but I was too young to have paid much attention. I was 15 that day, but I do remember that poster quite clearly, and it was numinous for me because I had been brought up on post-World War II stories. My father was a naval officer, and all those World War II movies that were around back then. And on the way to Japan, so the night before this, I was reading the novel Battle Cry on my way to Japan. And on those days, it was a 27-hour flight from, it was actually 3 9-hour flights, each flight from San Francisco to Hawaii was 9 hours, Hawaii to Wake Island was 9 hours, and Hawaii to Midway was 9 hours, and Midway to Tachikawa was 9 hours. And so what that poster meant to me in a numinous kind of way was that the world was going to be different, and that the United States and Japan, at least, and maybe the rest of the world, had given up on World War II. And that was quite encouraging for me, and it certainly was an important event for me in my lifetime, because about 6 weeks later, I had gone to a dance at the teen club at the base in Yokohama. And by then, we were living in Kamakura, which is a historical capital of Japan, where there is the great Buddha and many very ancient shrines in Japan. And so it was literally out in the Japanese economy. And so all of our neighbors were Japanese. And I was 15, so having been brought up the way I was quite apprehensive. And on this particular night, I got to the Yokohama train station about 11 or 11:15 at night, and I knew that my train would come on a certain platform, so I got onto that platform. What I didn't know is that at least two different train lines used that platform. And of course, I had not learned to read Japanese at this point. And so I just got on the first train that came along. And when the train left the station, and when it left the station, it didn't stop for 2 hours. And so I knew I was in trouble, because my train ride should have been 20 minutes. And so it's now about 2 o'clock in the morning, and I'm at a place at least 60 or 70 miles from home, and I have no clue where I am. I don't speak the language. And I asked the trainman on the platform, when's the next train going back toward Yokohama? And he says, no, Owari, it's finished, everything's finished. And so I knew I didn't have a train to take me back. And there was one about 100-watt white light bulb on this platform. And here I am, a 15-year-old American in the pitch dark in the middle of Japan, where I did not know where I was. And it was a very interesting experience into the belly of the whale, you might say. And it turned out to be an ongoing cornucopia of experiences. And because then a taxi driver went by the station, and he was just sort of looking up on the platform to see if anybody had been left behind, and he saw me, and so I ran down and got into the taxi. He didn't realize I was American until I got into the taxi, and we drove for 2 hours, and I just told him, take me to Kamakura, the town I could find my way to the house. And we got to my house at something like 4:30 in the morning, and my father had spent all of his yen, and we didn't have greenbacks in those days. We had monopoly money, which the Navy called military payment certificates, because we didn't want a black market created in greenbacks. And so the bill was only 1,350 yen, which at that time was about $4. But Dad only had 400 yen left, and so he gave this taxi driver 400 yen, a carton of cigarettes, and $5 in military payment certificates. And he was happy and went away. And I was home at 4:30 in the morning. But you can well imagine, even today, I think if the same thing happened in Japan today, everything would be hunky-dory. But if that sort of thing were to happen in that kind of a context, even in the United States, I'm not sure that a 15-year-old boy would be safe. the way we were in Japan. And so it's a great credit to the Japanese that they evolved so much that they went out of their way to make sure that I got home that night. And so I was obviously thrilled with that, and I always have had tremendous respect for the Japanese after that. And the other thing that really changed my perspective about the Japanese was that when John F. Kennedy was shot, we were there in Japan, and again, I was on the train, and there were many, many Japanese on this train. They all had a newspaper story about JFK's assassination that they were reading, and there were many people just in active tears at that time. And, you know, obviously I was too. It was my senior year of high school. You know, I recognized that how important JFK was from the Japanese perspective. And that really changed my perspective on the world too. And Grenade just tuned in and said, "Is the stream almost over?" Yes, Grenade. I'm about to terminate it, and it will be on playback here shortly, but I can't talk more than 2 hours. I'm starting to learn my limits by making this YouTube channel, so I apologize for that, but it's been an interesting stream, and we've had quite a number of people viewing us tonight, so thank you all for being here. I appreciate that. And I had a very good response to a live stream I did yesterday in honor of the 100th anniversary of World War I's armistice. So I would urge you to all take a look at that. And Grenade, I would love to have you in the conversation, but you can get in the conversation on the comments on the replay. Okay, so so far I haven't generated much interaction from all of you, so I'm going to try this again next week with some more quotes, and I hope that if you have quotes that you would like to discuss from Dr. Jung, I'd urge you to send them in to me, and then I'll try to put them in the system, or you can simply type them into the chat, and we'll talk about them through chat. But I am going to terminate right now, and I look forward to seeing you next week at 8 p.m. on Monday. If you are not a member of our advanced reading group but would like to be, send me an email to skip.conover@gmail.com, and we'll get that organized. We are about halfway, a little more than halfway through of ION, and so all the video from the seminars throughout the book are online and are available to advanced reading group members, and we do the live stream on Zoom every Wednesday at 1:30 p.m. So you're welcome to participate in that, and I look forward to hearing from you. And if anybody wants me to come and speak to your group anywhere about Dr. Jung, I'd be happy to do that too. If it's outside of the Washington, D.C. area, though, I will need some help on travel expenses. But if you're in the Washington, D.C. area and would like me to speak to a group or to a college class about Jungian psychology, I'd be happy to do that. And so, and oh, by the way, you're also free to steal anything that you find on this channel that I've created in terms of putting it into videos that you want to put into. I just ask that you give credit to this channel if you decide to put some part of one of my videos in one of your videos. I think there are a lot of pithy quotes that you might find if you looked. But my voice is now kaput, and so I'm going to sign off for tonight. Good night.